The merciless New Mexico sun was beating down on the red earth when Swift Crow spotted the first column of smoke on the horizon. His experienced eyes, accustomed to reading the signs of nature, immediately recognized that this was no ordinary campfire. The thick black smoke rose in jagged spirals, carrying with it the harbinger of tragedy. Mounted on his spotted Mustang, the Navajo warrior adjusted the holster on his waist and led his horse towards the smoke. The last few weeks had been tense in the borderlands. Groups of bandits taking advantage of the chaos following the Civil War had been attacking stagecoaches and small towns without distinction. Corvo Veloz's concern went beyond these attacks. His people were facing one of the worst droughts in years, and the buffalo herds vital for the tribe's survival during the winter were becoming increasingly scarce. As a warrior assigned to patrol the borders of Navajo territory, he carried the additional burden of finding solutions to the impending crisis. As he approached the source of the smoke, the scene of destruction confirmed his suspicions. A burnt-out wagon lay overturned, its wheels still smoking in the midday sun. Broken crates and scattered belongings told the silent story of yet another brutal attack. It was then that a subtle movement among the rocks caught his eye. With the agility of his years of experience, Swift Crow dismounted and approached cautiously, weapon in hand. To his surprise, he found a young woman cowering her, blue eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse with thirst, "don't hurt me." Swift Crow put away his gun and held out a canteen of water to the girl. "Fear not," he said in carefully articulated English. "I am not like those who did this." The young woman, who introduced herself as Hannah Reynolds, drank the water greedily. Her brown hair was covered in dust, and a shallow cut marked her forehead. Little by little, between sobs and pauses, she began to tell her story. Orphaned at a young age, Hannah was traveling with a group of traders when they were attacked by bandits, led by the notorious Buck Martinez. The brutal outlaw was known for his ruthlessness and for leading one of the most feared gangs in the territory. "They killed them all," Hannah said, her hands shaking as she held the canteen. "But they didn't find what they were looking for." It was then that she cautiously revealed a folded piece of paper that she kept next to her body. It was a map, apparently old, with markings in Spanish and mysterious symbols. "My adoptive father gave me this before he died. He said it led to a lost Spanish city full of treasures." Corvo Veloz's eyes sparkled with interest. Ancient stories of his people spoke of a Spanish city in the mountains, abandoned for generations, where the colonizers had stashed away great riches. If it really existed, it could be the salvation his tribe needed to survive the winter. "Why do you trust me with this secret?" he asked, studying Hannah's young but determined face. "Because you were the only one who stopped to help," she replied simply. "And because I need help finding this place before Buck Martinez gets to me." The Navajo warrior contemplated his options. Helping the girl would mean getting involved in a dangerous treasure hunt with ruthless bandits on his tail. On the other hand, if the lost city really existed, it could guarantee the survival of his people. "The spirits put us on the same path for a reason," Swift Crow finally said. "I'll help you. But first, we need to find a safe place. Night is approaching and Buck Martinez has eyes everywhere." Hannah nodded gratefully as Swift Raven helped her onto her horse. As they rode towards Navajo territory, the warrior couldn't help but think of the stories his grandfather told about the lost city. It was said to be a sacred place, protected by ancient curses and guarded by the spirits of the first peoples. The sun was beginning to set over the horizon, painting the sky with shades of red and orange, reminiscent of blood and fire. Somewhere, in that vast desert, Buck Martinez and his men were surely already in pursuit. And in the distant mountains, the secrets of an ancient city were waiting to be discovered. Swift Raven knew he was engaging in something greater than a simple search for treasure. It was a journey that would test not only his courage and skill as a warrior, but also his ability to trust someone so different from his people. As for Hannah, the young orphan had a mixture of fear and hope in her eyes that intrigued him. Fate had intertwined their paths in an unexpected way, and now only time would tell whether this unlikely union would be their salvation or their downfall. As the shadows of dusk lengthened over the red earth, Swift Crow said a silent prayer to the spirits of his ancestors, asking for wisdom to guide them through the dangers that surely awaited them. Night was falling over Navajo territory when Swift Crow and Hannah reached a small cave in the rocky hillsides. The warrior had carefully chosen this refuge, knowing that the winding trails and sparse vegetation would make it difficult for Buck Martinez's men to track them. "We'll rest here until dawn," said Swift Crow, helping Hannah to dismount. The young woman was still trembling slightly, although she tried to hide her vulnerability. Her blue eyes, once dominated by fear, now revealed a growing determination. While Swift Crow lit a small fire, protected by the rock formation, Hannah removed the map from her boot. In the flickering light of the flames, the ancient markings took on an almost mystical appearance. The yellowed paper was stained at the edges, but the crucial details remained legible. My adoptive father, Samuel Reynolds, was a scholar obsessed with ancient history, Hannah explained, her fingers gently tracing the lines on the map. He spent years collecting information about this city. He said that the Spanish abandoned the place after a great tragedy, leaving behind not only gold, but also large reserves of food and seeds. Swift Crow studied the map with renewed attention. "Our elders speak of a sacred place in the mountains where the white men built their stone houses. They say that the spirits were furious at their greed and drove them away with winds and storms." A contemplative silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of a distant owl. Hannah took from her bag a small leather journal also saved from the attack. "My father's notes can help us decipher the symbols," she said, leafing through the pages carefully. He marked some important landmarks, a rock formation that looks like an eagle, 3 peaks lined up like arrows pointing towards the sky. As they discussed the details of the map, Swift Crow realized that Hannah was not just a frightened young girl. She had a keen intelligence and an inner strength that surprised him. Her knowledge of the region, although different from his own, could be vital to the success of the mission. "Buck Martinez isn't the only danger we'll face," Raven warned, feeding the fire with dry twigs. "The mountains hold their own secrets. There are places where even the bravest Navajo warriors fear to tread." Hannah nodded, understanding the seriousness of the warning. "My father mentioned ancient curses in his writings. He believed that the Spanish sealed the entrance to the city with Catholic rituals, fearing that something evil would escape." The night advanced, and with it came the disquieting sounds of the desert. Swift Crow remained alert, his keen senses picking up every movement in the shadows. His mind, however, was torn between the immediate dangers and the needs of his people. "Why does Buck Martinez want this map so badly?" he asked, watching Hannah carefully put the documents away. "He worked for my father for a while as a guide," she replied, her face hardening at the memory. "When he found out about the lost city, he tried to steal the research. My father threw him out, but Buck swore that he would find the treasure, even if he had to kill every person who stood in his way." A distant noise made them both tense up. Swift Crow moved silently to the cave entrance, his hand on the handle of his gun. After a few moments of careful observation, he relaxed slightly. "Just a coyote," he said, returning to the fire. "But we should sleep in shifts. The danger is still close." Hannah offered to take the first watch, but Raven kindly declined. "Rest," he insisted. "Tomorrow we start our journey to the mountains, and every moment of rest will be precious." As Hannah settled down, using her bag as a pillow, Swift Crow gazed up at the starry sky visible from the cave entrance. The constellations told ancient stories to his people, stories of warriors' spirits and intertwined destinies. His thoughts wandered to his tribe, to the worried faces of the elders discussing the shortage of food. The winter would be merciless, and without the buffalo herds, many would not survive. The lost city represented more than a treasure, it was a hope of salvation. Hannah was sleeping now, her soft breathing mingling with the night sounds of the desert. Swift Raven noticed how she held the diary tightly to her chest even in her sleep. That book and the map were all that remained of her family, just as the lost city could be the last hope for his people. Dawn came slowly, bringing with it a biting cold typical of desert nights. Swift Raven fed the fire once more his movements, precise and silent, so as not to disturb his protégé's sleep. On the horizon, the first signs of dawn were beginning to appear, bringing with them the promise of a journey that would change their destiny forever. Somewhere in those wild lands, Buck Martinez and his men were surely planning their next move. And in the distant mountains, the secrets of an ancient city awaited, protected by forces beyond human comprehension. Swift Raven knew that every step of the quest would be challenging, but something in his heart told him that the spirits had chosen well in placing Hannah in his path. The young woman stirred in her sleep, mumbling incomprehensible words. Swift Raven carefully adjusted her blanket, a protective gesture that surprised even him. In less than a day, that orphan girl had become more than a liability. She was an ally on a mission that could save or doom them both. Dawn painted the horizon in golden hues as Swift Crow and Hannah resumed their journey. The Navajo warrior had chosen a less obvious route through the mountains, following ancient trails known only to his people. With each stop to consult the map, their anxiety grew, along with the certainty that they were not alone in their quest. "My father used to say that the desert has eyes," Hannah commented as they crossed a narrow pass between craggy rocks. "Now I see what he meant." Swift Crow nodded his watchful eyes, constantly scanning the terrain. The desert sees everything, but it also hides a lot. That's how we've survived here for generations. During the ride, Hannah shared more details about Buck Martinez and his connection to the search for the lost city. The bandit had initially been hired by his adoptive father as a guide and protector during archaeological expeditions. However, as the discoveries became more significant, greed began to consume the man. "Buck changed when we found the first concrete evidence of the city," Hannah explained, her voice laden with bitterness. "He started asking questions about treasure, about secret routes. My father realized too late that he had brought a snake into the house." Hannah's account brought up memories that Corvo Veloz preferred to keep buried. He also knew Buck Martinez, although from a very different perspective. Years ago, the bandit had led an attack on a neighboring Navajo village, leaving a trail of destruction that still haunted the stories told around campfires. "Your father wasn't the first to be betrayed by Martinez," Corvo Veloz finally said, breaking a long silence. "He has a special talent for finding weakness in people and exploiting it until he destroys them." At midday, they stopped by a small stream to rest their horses. While Hannah studied her father's notes, Swift Crow took the opportunity to replenish his supplies with medicinal herbs that grew on the banks. His people's traditional knowledge of desert plants could make the difference between life and death in the days to come. Here, Hannah caught her eye, pointing to a page in the diary. "My father mentions an ancient Navajo prophecy about the city. Do you know anything about it? Swift Crow approached, his interest piqued. The mention of his people's ancient prophecies in a white man's diary was unexpected. As he read the notes over Hannah's shoulder, he felt a shiver run down his spine. "These are sacred words," he said, recognizing the symbols described. "They speak of a time when the people of the desert and those who came from the east would unite to awaken the sleeping guardians." Hannah looked at him with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. "Do you think that this has anything to do with our quest?" Before Swift Raven could answer, a distant sound of hooves alerted them. Within seconds, they were both mounted again, galloping towards a set of rock formations that would offer cover. "3 riders," Swift Crow whispered after studying the dust trails on the horizon, "approaching from the east." Hannah paled. Buck always travels with 2 of his most loyal men, the Carter brothers. They're just as ruthless as he is. Hidden among the rocks, they watched the riders pass a few hundred meters away. Buck Martinez was easily recognizable by his black hat and the scar that cut across his face from his left eye to his chin. The Carter brothers, wild-looking twins, flanked their leader like bloodthirsty shadows. "They're going the wrong way," Swift Crow observed after the group had distanced themselves. "But we can't let our guard down. Buck Martinez is not a man to give up easily." They resumed their journey along an even more cautious path, taking advantage of every rise in the terrain to remain hidden. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, but neither of them dared complain. Each step brought them closer to their goal, and closer to the danger that stalked them. As they advanced, Hannah noticed a subtle change in her companion's posture. Swift Crow seemed more tense, his eyes often turning to specific rock formations with a mixture of reverence and apprehension. "We are entering sacred territory," he explained, noticing Hannah's silent questioning. "My people believe that the spirits of the ancestors are stronger here. They protect the secrets of these lands and punish those who don't respect them." The wind began to blow harder, carrying with it strange sounds that sounded like whispers in a long-forgotten language. Hannah clutched the diary to her chest, feeling both close to and distant from her adoptive father. The further they went into that mystical territory, the more she understood why he had dedicated his life to unraveling its mysteries. "What will happen when we find the city?" she asked, softly, her words almost carried away by the wind. Swift Crow remained silent for a few moments, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was beginning its descent. "Perhaps the real question is, what will the city do to us when we find it?" The enigmatic answer hung between them like a cloud laden with omens. Ahead of them, the mountains seemed to grow their shadows, stretching like dark fingers across the red earth. Somewhere among those ancient peaks, a lost city held not only material treasures, but also secrets that could forever change the fate of everyone involved in the search. The day was drawing to a close, and with the night would come the need to find another shelter. But for now, they continued their journey in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what awaited them in the depths of that wild and mysterious territory. The 4th day of their journey brought with it the first concrete signs of the lost city. Among ancient rock formations, Corvo Veloz and Hannah discovered fragments of Spanish pottery and traces of ancient stone structures. Each discovery increased the tension between them, mixing hope with a growing sense of danger. "These symbols," Hannah murmured, crouching down to examine markings carved into a half-buried stone. "They're different from the ones on the map. They look older." Swift Crow dismounted to take a closer look. His fingers traced the carvings with reverence. "They are markings of my people," he explained. warnings about the spirits that inhabit these lands. The wind blew stronger at high altitudes, carrying with it the distant sound of thunder. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising one of the dreaded desert storms. Hannah consulted her father's diary, comparing his notes with the surrounding landscape. According to his research, the city must be hidden in a valley between three peaks that resemble arrows, she said, her eyes scanning the mountains. And there must be a rock formation resembling an eagle guarding the entrance. "I know these peaks," Swift Crow replied, his face taking on a grave expression. "Our elders call them the arrows of the gods. Few warriors venture there. They say the spirits grow stronger as we approach." As they advanced over the rough terrain, Hannah noticed a subtle change in her companion's demeanor. Swift Raven's ever-alert posture now seemed charged with an added tension, as if each step took them deeper into a territory where the rules of the known world lost their meaning. "Have you been here before?" she asked, watching as he studied each rock formation with unusual intensity. "Once, many years ago," he replied after a long moment. "I was young and too proud to listen to the warnings of the elders, the storm that forced us to retreat. It wasn't natural." A particularly strong gust of wind stopped them momentarily. Hannah's hat flew off her head, saved only by Swift Raven's quick reflexes. As he handed it back, his fingers brushed hers, briefly causing a moment of unexpected tension between them. "Thank you," she murmured, blushing slightly, despite the chill that was beginning to set in. The moment was interrupted by a distant sound, the unmistakable echo of a gunshot. They both instinctively ducked for cover among the rocks. Swift Crow drew his gun, his eyes scanning the horizon for movement. "Buck," Hannah whispered, her heart hammering in her chest. "No," Raven replied after a few moments of observation. "The sound came from the wrong direction, but that means there are others searching the city." The revelation brought a new level of urgency to their mission. It wasn't just Buck Martinez and his men who posed a threat. Other treasure hunters had also been attracted by the legends of the lost city. They continued their journey with redoubled caution, taking advantage of every shadow and rock formation to remain hidden. Storm clouds were fast approaching, turning the afternoon into an early twilight. "There," Hannah suddenly pointed, her voice barely containing her excitement. The eagle against the darkening sky, a monumental rock formation loomed, its natural features actually resembling an eagle in flight. Hannah's heart raced. It was exactly as her father had described it in his notes. Swift Crow studied the formation with experienced eyes. "There's a natural passage under the eagle's wings," he observed. "And look at the markings on the E. Rocks, they're not natural." They approached the rock formation slowly, each step echoing with the weight of history. Hannah pulled out her diary feverishly, comparing her notes with the symbols carved into the stone. "They're indications," she exclaimed. "My father wrote about this. The Spanish used Catholic symbols mixed with native markings to hide the key path." A powerful clap of thunder shook the air, making the horses neigh nervously. The storm was almost upon them, but there was something different about its approach, something that made the hairs on the back of Corvo Veloz's neck stand on end. "We need to find shelter," he declared, watching the sky with concern. "This is no ordinary storm." Hannah hesitated, clearly reluctant to put off exploring when they were so close. "But we've just found the entrance." "And she'll be here after the storm," Swift Crow interrupted firmly. "If the spirits are agitated, we must respect their warnings." As if to emphasize his words, a bolt of lightning cut through the sky, briefly illuminating the eagle formation. For a moment, Hannah could have sworn she saw shadows moving among the rock's shadows that didn't belong in this world. They found refuge in a small cave not far away, high enough to avoid possible flooding. While the storm roared outside, Hannah took the opportunity to study her father's notes on the entrance to the city in more detail. "He mentions a ritual," she said, straining her eyes in the dim light of their small fire. "Something that must be done before crossing the passage under the eagle. Otherwise, the guardian spirits will take their toll," Swift Crow added softly. "My people know well the cost of disrespecting sacred places." Hannah looked at him, noticing for the first time an old scar on his neck, partially hidden by his black hair. "Is that what happened the last time you were here?" The warrior unconsciously touched the scar, his eyes lost in memories. "Some prices are too high to forget," he replied enigmatically. The storm continued into the night, its thunder echoing across the mountains like the roars of ancient creatures. Hannah and Swift Raven stayed awake, each lost in their own thoughts about what awaited them beyond the stone eagle. At some point during the night, as the shadows danced on the cave walls, Hannah realized that her quest had turned into something greater than just treasure. It was a journey that intertwined past and present, legend and reality, two different worlds united by a common destiny. And as the wind howled outside, carrying with it the whispers of the guardian spirits of the lost city, Hannah couldn't help thinking that perhaps her father had always known that she would need someone like Swift Raven to complete her mission, someone who understood that some treasures come with a price that goes beyond gold and silver. The storm had subsided by the time the sun rose, leaving the air charged with a residual electricity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Swift Raven and Hannah returned to the eagle formation, where the wet rocks shone like obsidian in the morning light. "My father's writings mention that the ritual should be performed at sunrise," Hannah said nervously, leafing through the diary. "He documented parts of the procedure, but some pages are water-damaged." Swift Crow examined the inscriptions at the base of the rock formation. His fingers traced symbols that mixed Catholic elements with native pictograms, a unique fusion of two cultures trying to protect or perhaps imprison something beyond their comprehension. "I recognize some of these symbols," he murmured. "They're similar to those used in our purification rituals. The Spanish must have incorporated native practices into their own rituals." Hannah approached her shoulder, brushing lightly against Raven Swift's, as she too studied the markings. "Here," she pointed to a specific sequence. "My father translated this part. It talks about washing away sins with the blood of the earth." "Red ochre," Raven replied immediately. "It's considered the blood of the earth by my people, used in sacred rituals." Luckily, the warrior carried a small bag of ochre with him, part of his traditional medicine kit. While he prepared the mixture with rainwater collected from the rocks, Hannah continued to decipher the instructions in the diary. "The ritual requires that you both be marked with the sacred symbols," she read, her voice trembling slightly. "And we must recite words in Spanish and in the Navajo language." A sudden wind blew through the canyon, bringing with it a sound that could have been mistaken for distant voices. The horses stirred, neighing nervously. Swift Crow soothed the animals with soft words in their native tongue before turning his attention to Hannah. "Do you trust me?" he asked, holding up the prepared ochre. Hannah met his gaze and nodded without hesitation. "With my life." With deft fingers, Swift Crow began to trace the sacred symbols on Hannah's forehead and hands replicating the markings on the rocks. Each touch was deliberate, almost reverent, sending shivers down the young woman's spine. When she had finished, Hannah repeated the process on him, following his instructions carefully. "Now the words," she said, consulting her diary. First in Spanish, then in your language. Together they recited the ancient words, their voices blending with the wind that seemed to grow in intensity. The sun, now higher on the horizon, cast strange shadows across the eagle formation, creating patterns that seemed to move of their own accord. Suddenly, a deep sound emanated from the rocks like a sigh from the depths of the earth. The ground beneath her feet vibrated slightly, and small stones rolled down the slope. Hannah instinctively grabbed Swift Raven's arm, who pulled her close protectively. "It's working," he whispered, watching as the shadows began to line up in an impossible way, revealing a passage that had previously been perfectly camouflaged in the rock. Before they could move towards the opening, a gunshot echoed through the gorge. The bullet ricocheted off the nearby rocks, forcing them to seek cover. "Well done, fellas!" Buck Martinez's gruff voice rang out above them. "You did all the heavy lifting for us." Swift Crow pushed Hannah behind a large boulder, drawing his gun in one fluid motion. At the top of the canyon, Buck and the Carter brothers had strategically positioned themselves, their guns pointed downwards. "You always had perfect timing, Buck," Swift Crow shouted, keeping his voice controlled despite the fury he felt. "Still, hiding behind others to do your dirty work." A harsh laugh was the reply. "Still bitter about that village Indian. That was just business. Like it's just business here." Hannah, crouching beside Swift Crow, reloaded her own gun, a small revolver she kept hidden in her boot. "They must have followed us during the storm," she whispered. "Then you have two options," Buck continued. "They can come out and show us the way, or we can do it the hard way. And believe me, Indian, you don't want it to be the hard way." Swift Crow looked at the newly revealed passage, then at Hannah. Years of experience told him that his chances in an open firefight were slim. But something deeper, older, warned him that allowing Buck Martinez into the Lost City would be an even bigger mistake. "The spirits will not allow you to enter," he shouted in response. "The ritual must be done with a pure heart." Buck's laughter echoed again, colder this time. "Spirits, always the damn spirits with you Indians. Well, let me show you what I think of your spirits." The sound of more gunfire filled the air, rock fragments flying in all directions. Hannah stifled a scream as a bullet passed too close, leaving a trail of blood on her arm. Swift Crow acted instantly, tearing a piece of his shirt to make a makeshift bandage. As he tended to Hannah's wound, his brain worked furiously in search of a way out. "The passage," Hannah whispered, clenching her teeth against the pain. "If we can get in, maybe." More gunfire interrupted her suggestion, but Swift Crow understood. The entrance was only a few meters away. With the ritual completed, theoretically, only they could pass safely. "When I tell you," he muttered, "run for the passage. Don't look back. Don't stop for anything." Hannah nodded, her blue eyes fixed on his with a mixture of fear and determination. Swift Crow waited until he heard the distinct sound of weapons being reloaded before he acted. "Now!" What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As Hannah ran into the passageway, Swift Crow fired a series of precise shots, forcing Buck and his men to seek cover. The air seemed to vibrate with an ancient energy, and the wind suddenly increased, howling through the gorge like 1,000 voices in agony. When Swift Crow reached the entrance, Hannah was already inside. Together, they watched in astonishment as impossible shadows began to move across the walls of the passage, like curtains of darkness dancing in the wind. "You won't escape!" Buck shouted, his voice almost lost in the supernatural wind. But as they moved deeper into the passage, leaving the daylight behind, both Hannah and Raven knew that they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Ahead of them, in the depths of the mountain, the secrets of the lost city awaited, along with whatever price the guardian spirits would demand for their intrusion. The darkness of the passage swallowed Hannah and Swift Raven as they advanced deeper into the bowels of the mountain. The air was thick and charged with an ancient smell of stone and damp earth. The only sounds were their cautious footsteps and the occasional drip of water from the stalactites. "Keep one hand on the wall," Corvo Veloz instructed in a low voice. The Spanish used to leave relief markings to guide the way. Hannah obeyed, her fingers gliding over the uneven surface of the rock. The wound on her arm throbbed, but she refused to show weakness. "Do you think Buck will follow us?" "Not right away," Raven replied, her voice echoing softly in the tunnel. "He's reckless, but he's no fool. He knows he'll have to find another way in." As they advanced, Hannah realized that the tunnel was not entirely natural. At regular intervals, there were signs of human work, carvings in the rock, roughly carved steps, and occasionally niches that must once have housed torches. "Wait," she whispered, stopping abruptly. "I feel something under my fingers. It feels like a cross." Swift Raven approached, his fingers finding the markings next to hers. The momentary contact sent an electric current through them, both intensified by the darkness that surrounded them. "They're symbols of protection," he explained, his voice huskier than usual. "A mixture of Christianity and native rituals. The Spanish were so afraid of what they kept here that they used every form of protection they knew." A distant noise made them freeze. It could have been just water running down the mountain or something more sinister. Hannah unconsciously moved closer to Swift Crow, seeking comfort in his solid presence. "My father's diary mentions that the Spanish weren't the first to build here," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "They found older ruins from a people who came before." "My people tell stories about the ancients," Corvo Veloz replied. "They say they knew secrets that should not be disturbed." The Spaniards, in their greed, ignored the warnings. They continued forward now with even more caution. The tunnel began to widen, and the air gradually became colder. Hannah shivered, partly from the cold, partly from the growing tension that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. Suddenly, Swift Crow stopped his hand, finding Hannah's arm in the dark. "Light ahead," he whispered. It was true. A faint, greenish luminescence was beginning to make itself visible, emanating from somewhere beyond a bend in the tunnel. The light had an unnatural quality, pulsing softly like a distant heart. "It's like my father described it," Hannah murmured, flipping quickly through her diary. "He called it the light of the ancestors, some kind of phosphorescent moss or mineral that the ancients used to illuminate their paths." As they approached the source of the light, details of the tunnel began to reveal themselves. The walls, now, displayed elaborate carvings, dancing figures, mysterious symbols, and battle scenes that seemed to move in the pulsating light. "Look," Hannah pointed to a particular sequence of symbols. "They're similar to the ones we saw at the entrance, but more complex." Swift Crow studied the markings with intensity. "These are warnings," he finally said, his voice laden with concern. "They speak of a great power stored in the depths, and of the price to be paid by those who seek to possess it." A sudden sound of falling stones behind them made them turn sharply. Hannah drew her revolver while Swift Raven wielded her knife, both trying to penetrate the darkness with their eyes. "Buck," Hannah whispered. "No," Raven replied after a tense moment. "The sound came from very far away. But we're not alone here." The greenish light seemed to pulse more intensely now, as if responding to their presence. Hannah felt a sudden dizziness, and her ritual markings began to tingle. "Do you feel that?" she asked, touching her forehead where Swift Crow had applied the red ochre. "The symbols are reacting to the place," he confirmed, also touching his own markings. "The ritual wasn't just to let us in, it was to protect us from what we would find in here." They continued forward, now guided by the mysterious light. The tunnel began to branch, but something, perhaps the symbols on their bodies, perhaps a deeper instinct, guided them along the right path. Hannah consulted her father's diary again. It mentions a central chamber, a kind of temple where the Spanish kept their treasures. But there are pages missing, pages that explained something crucial about the place. "Your spirits guided us here for a reason," Raven said softly. "Perhaps some answers can only be found by moving on." A sudden wind blew through the tunnel, bringing with it whispers in languages long forgotten. Hannah felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end, and even Swift Crow, with all his experience, couldn't help but shiver. "The stories of my people speak of guardians," he said, his voice little more than a whisper. Ancestral spirits who protect the secrets of the ancients. They test those who enter, judging their hearts and intentions." "What if we fail the test?" Hannah asked, although part of her already knew the answer. Before Swift Raven could reply, a sound echoed off the walls. Something between a wail and a chant, laden with an ancient and terrible sadness. The greenish light pulsed more intensely, and impossible shadows began to dance on the walls. "Don't look directly at the shadows," Raven warned, pulling Hannah closer. "Keep your thoughts focused on why we're here." Hannah closed her eyes for a moment, concentrating. She thought of her adoptive father, of his quest for knowledge that ended up costing him his life. She thought of the Swift Crow tribe threatened by the hunger of the coming winter. When she opened her eyes again, her determination was renewed. "That way," she pointed to a passage where the light seemed more intense. "Something tells me that's the right way." Swift Raven nodded, recognizing in Hannah a strength that went beyond her youth. Together, they advanced towards the light, their shadows blending into the wall as one. Ahead, the secrets of the lost city awaited, along with whatever fate the spirits had in store for them. The chamber into which Hannah and Swift Raven emerged was vast, with a ceiling so high that it was lost in the darkness above. The greenish light that had guided them through the tunnel now emanated from crystals embedded in the walls, creating patterns that resembled earthly constellations. "It's amazing," Hannah whispered, her voice echoing softly. "Look at the architecture. It's not Spanish or Navajo. It's something older." Swift Crow studied the massive columns that supported the invisible ceiling, each covered in symbols that seemed to pulsate with a life of their own. "The ancients built this long before the Spanish arrived. My people always knew of their existence, but few dared to seek them out." In the center of the chamber, a black stone altar stood like an island in a sea of shadows. Above it, something shone with a light of its own, not the glitter of gold that Buck Martinez so coveted, but something more ethereal, more disturbing. "My father's notes," Hannah said frantically, leafing through the diary. "He mentioned something about a sacred artifact, a key to something greater than treasure." Before they could get any closer to the altar, an icy wind blew through the chamber, although there was no visible opening through which it could enter. The shadows on the walls began to move unnaturally, and the symbols on their skins, the ritual markings, began to burn. "The guardians," Crow muttered instinctively, placing himself between Hannah and the dancing shadows. They're here. From the depths of the darkness, voices began to echo, some in ancient Spanish, others in long-forgotten native languages, and still others in languages that no living human ear had ever heard. The voices intertwined in a cacophony that made Hannah's head throb. "They're judging us," Swift Crow said, his voice tense. "We need to prove ourselves worthy." Hannah held her father's diary tightly against her chest. How do we prove our intentions? In response, the shadows on the walls began to form images, scenes from past events that they both recognized. Hannah saw her adoptive father in his last moments, protecting her from Buck's thugs. She saw the Navajo village that Buck had attacked years before, and the young Swift Raven trying to save his people. "They're showing our moments of choice," Raven explained, her voice laced with emotion as she relived those memories. "Moments when we choose others over ourselves." The images continued to flow, showing the journey that had brought them. There, every decision, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt and courage. Hannah realized that silent tears were streaming down her face, but she made no mention of drying them. "We didn't come here out of greed," she said aloud, addressing the shadows. "We came because people depend on us. People who will die if we don't find help." The voices gradually diminished until only a soft murmur remained. The air in the chamber seemed to lighten, and the symbols on their skins stopped burning. "They've accepted us," Swift Crow said, relaxing slightly. "We can approach the altar." Together they walked towards the center of the chamber. On the black altar, a crystal the size of a fist pulsed with an inner light, like a heart made of pure light. Around it, ancient inscriptions told a story that made Hannah's eyes widen. "It's no ordinary treasure," she said, quickly translating the symbols with the help of her father's notes. "It's a key to something much greater, an ancient knowledge of how to work with the earth, how to make the desert bloom." Swift Crow gently touched the crystal. "The ancients knew secrets that have been lost to time. Secrets that could save my people and many others." A distant crash interrupted the moment. The sound of voices and footsteps echoed through the tunnels leading to the chamber. "Buck!" Hannah whispered, her heart racing. "He must have found another way in." "We can't let him get here," Raven said firmly. "This knowledge in the wrong hands would be devastating." The ancestral voices rose again, this time with a tone of urgency. The shadows on the walls began to move more quickly, as if responding to the imminent threat. "The Guardians," Hannah said, an idea forming in her mind. "They accepted us because our intentions are pure. But Buck, he won't survive the trial," Raven added, understanding. "But we need to make sure the knowledge is safe." Hannah quickly copied down the most important entries in her father's diary, while Swift Raven collected the crystal from the altar. The moment the artifact was removed, the light in the chamber changed, becoming more intense, more threatening. "It's time to go," Speed Crow said carefully, putting the crystal away. "The Guardians will take care of Buck and his men." The voices of Buck and his cronies were closer now, but Hannah and Raven Swift had already located an alternative passage revealed by the dancing shadows on the walls. As they hurried through the new tunnel, they heard Buck's screams echoing through the chamber, screams that were soon drowned out by sounds that neither of them dared try to identify. "What will happen to this place?" Hannah asked, as they ran the crystal pulsing gently in Raven's pouch. "It will go back to sleep," he replied, "protected by the Guardians until it is needed again." The passage took them on an upward path, and soon they could feel the fresh air on the surface. When they finally emerged, it was at a completely different point on the mountain, far from the entrance to the Stone Eagle. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with colors that seemed to reflect the extraordinary journey they had just experienced. Hannah looked at Swift Crow, seeing in him not just a warrior or a protector, but someone who now shared with her a sacred knowledge and an equally sacred responsibility. "What now?" she asked softly. Swift Crow looked to the horizon where the lands of his people awaited them. "Now we begin the real journey to use this knowledge to help those in need, honoring the trust the Guardians have placed in us." The wind blew gently, carrying with it the last echoes of the ancient voices like a final blessing for the mission ahead of them. The return to the Navajo lands was a journey marked by a silence filled with meaning. Hannah and Swift Raven rode, side by side, each absorbed in their own thoughts about the extraordinary events they had witnessed in the lost city. The crystal, carefully wrapped in leather and kept in Raven Swift's bag, pulsed gently, as if responding to the rhythm of the horses' hooves. Buck's screams still echo in my mind, Hannah finally confessed, breaking the silence. The midday sun beat down on their backs as they crossed an arid plain. "Do you think he—" "The Guardians have made their choice," Raven replied, softly. "Just as they did with us. It's best not to question their methods." Hannah nodded, clutching her father's diary to her chest. The pages now contained not only his research, but also the ancient secrets she had copied from the altar knowledge that could change the fate of many people. As they rode along, Swift Crow shared stories of his people, talking about how the elders kept the memory of the old ones alive through songs and rituals. Hannah listened intently, noticing how the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, how the Navajo traditions connected with the secrets they had discovered. "My father always said that there is more wisdom in the old stories than in the most modern books," she commented, a sad smile playing on her lips. "Now I understand what he meant." The day progressed, and with it came the need to find shelter. They found a small grotto protected by rock formations, ideal for spending the night. While Swift Crow prepared a fire, Hannah studied the notes she had made, comparing them with her father's writings. "It's fascinating," she said, her eyes shining in the firelight. "The ancients developed methods to make water flow under the earth, to find springs where others only saw dry rock. With this knowledge, your tribe could—" She stopped when she saw how intensely Swift Crow was watching her from the other side of the fire. There was something in his gaze that made her heart race. "You're unlike anyone I've ever met, Hannah Reynolds," he finally said. "You have the wisdom of the elders in a young heart." Hannah felt the blush creep up her cheeks silently, thanking the darkness that concealed it. "It's funny," she replied, her voice soft. "I've always felt out of place among my own people. But here with you—" A distant coyote howl interrupted the moment, reminding them of the dangers that still surrounded them. Even with Buck Martinez eliminated, other bandits would surely emerge upon learning of the lost city's treasures. "We need to be careful. With this knowledge," Swift Crow said, feeding the fire with dry twigs. "In the wrong hands, it could bring more destruction than salvation." Hannah agreed, closing the journal. "How will we know who to trust?" "The Guardians have shown us the way," he replied, his eyes reflecting the flames. "We must look into people's hearts, just as they looked into ours." The night advanced, bringing with it a chill that forced them closer to the fire and to each other. Hannah noticed how Swift Crow occasionally touched the place where the crystal was kept, as if checking for its presence. "Are you worried about your tribe's reaction?" she asked gently. Swift Crow remained silent for a moment before answering. "The elders have always known the secrets of the ancients, but knowledge brings responsibility. and change is not always welcomed even when necessary. "I'll be by your side," Hannah said firmly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "If you allow me." The look that Swift Crow gave her was full of emotion. In just a few days, this young orphan had become more than a fellow traveler. She was someone he trusted completely, someone who understood the weight of the responsibility they now shared. "The spirits brought us together for a reason," he said softly. "Perhaps it's time to trust your wisdom." The tension between them was palpable, electrified by the danger they had faced together, by the mutual trust they had built, and by something deeper that grew with each shared moment. Hannah moved slightly, decreasing the distance between them. "Swift Raven," she began, her voice little more than a whisper. But before she could continue, a noise in the darkness alerted them. They both stood up in one fluid movement, weapons in hand. Swift Crow moved silently to the entrance of the grotto, his heightened senses scanning the night. "Horsemen," he muttered. "3, maybe 4, following our tracks." "Buck's men?" Hannah asked, already collecting her belongings. "Probably looking for their leader," Swift Crow replied quickly, putting out the fire. "We need to move." Within minutes, they were mounted again, riding under the starlight. The crystal pulsed more intensely now, as if responding to the danger. Hannah realized that despite her fear, she felt strangely calm next to Swift Raven. "We still have a day's journey to your people," she calculated, remembering the mental map she had constructed during her journey. "And many secrets to protect until then," he added, guiding them along a path that only the Navajo knew. The night enveloped them like a protective cloak, as they rode, their shadows dancing in the moonlight like echoes of the guardians they had met in the lost city. Fate had intertwined their paths in ways neither of them could have foreseen, and now, under the starry New Mexico sky, Hannah Reynolds and Swift Raven were riding not only towards Navajo lands, but also towards a future that promised to be as challenging as it was extraordinary. The rising sun tinted the horizon red when Swift Crow and Hannah finally spotted the markers that indicated the entrance to Navajo territory. Ancient totems carved from weathered wood guarded the passage like silent sentinels. The crystal in Corvo Veloz's bag pulsed more intensely now, as if it recognized the proximity of its new home. "It's different from what I imagined," Hannah whispered, observing the rock formations that rose majestically around them. Small columns of smoke in the valley below indicated the presence of the Navajo camp. Swift Crow nodded, his normally stoic face betraying a mixture of relief and apprehension. "My people have lived on these lands since before the first Spaniards arrived. Every stone, every tree tells a story." As they made their way carefully down the path that led into the valley, Hannah noticed subtle changes in the vegetation. Despite the drought ravaging the region, small, hardy flowers were sprouting between the rocks, and green bushes dotted the arid landscape. "They're the sacred plants," Swift Crow explained, noticing his interest. "Our healers know their secrets passed down from generation to generation. But with each winter more severe than the last, even they begin to wither." The sound of children's voices reached them, followed by the sight of some Navajo children playing near the stream. At the sight of Swift Crow, they ran towards him, but stopped abruptly when they noticed Hannah. "Fear not," Swift Crow said, in his native tongue, dismounting with grace. "She is a friend who brings hope to our people." Hannah also dismounted, feeling the weight of the curious stares on her. One of the children, a girl who must have been no more than 6 years old, timidly approached and touched the fabric of her skirt. "Her name is Little Flower." Swift Crow translated a rare smile, softening his features. "She says your eyes resemble the summer sky." The tender moment was interrupted by the arrival of a group of Navajo warriors led by a tall man with long gray braids, Wise Bear, the head of the Council of Elders. "You return in difficult times, my son," the elder said in English, surprising Hannah. His dark eyes studied the young woman with intensity. "And you bring with you more than a stranger." Swift Raven made a respectful gesture before replying. "Father, we have found the city of the ancients, and with it, knowledge that can save our people." A murmur ran through the group of warriors. Wise Bear raised a hand, silencing them. "The spirits spoke of your arrival in dreams, but they also warned of the price of awakening long-dormant secrets." Hannah stepped forward, gathering all her courage. "Sir, I know I have no right to be here, but I promise that my intentions are pure. The city guardians have judged us and found us worthy." The old chief studied her for long moments before nodding slowly. "I see truth in your eyes, daughter. And I also see how my son looks at you, as if he had found something more precious than any ancient treasure." Swift, Raven and Hannah exchanged a quick glance, a faint blush coloring both their cheeks. The moment was interrupted by screams coming from the camp. A woman was running towards them, tears streaming down her face. "Crescent Moon," Swift Crow explained to Hannah, his voice tense. "My sister. Something is wrong." The woman caught up with the group, speaking rapidly in Navajo. Swift Crow visibly paled at her words. "What's wrong?" Hannah asked, her heart racing with worry. "My nephew, Little Wolf," he replied, his voice heavy with emotion. "The fever took him during the night. The healers say he won't make it until next morning." Hannah instinctively touched the diary in her bag. The inscriptions in the temple. There was knowledge about healing, about sacred plants that the ancients used. Wise Bear approached, his eyes shining with renewed interest. "The spirits wouldn't send us help without a purpose. Perhaps it's time to trust their designs." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. While the traditional healers continued their rituals, Hannah and Swift Raven worked feverishly, translating the ancient inscriptions and identifying the plants needed for the remedy described in the sacred texts. The crystal pulsed more intensely than ever, its soft light illuminating the pages of the journal as they worked. Hannah realized that it wasn't just an artifact of power. It was a key to unlocking the ancient knowledge contained in the very lands that surrounded them. When night fell, the herbal mixture was ready. Little Wolf, burning up with fever, could barely swallow the bitter medicine. Crescent Moon held his hand softly, singing an ancient healing song. "Now, we need to trust," said Swift Crow softly, leading Hannah out of the tent. "In the spirits, in the old ones, and in each other." Outside, the entire tribe seemed to be holding its breath. The air was charged not only with the tension of illness, but with the weight of the coming change. Hannah knew that this moment was a test not just of ancient knowledge, but of the trust that the people of Swift Raven were willing to place in her. "You've changed everything," Corvo Veloz said softly when they were alone under the starry sky. "My life, the fate of my people. Nothing will ever be the same." Hannah felt her heart race at the intensity of his gaze. "Change isn't always bad," she replied, finding the courage to express what had been growing in her heart ever since their paths had crossed. "Sometimes it's exactly what we need to find our true path." A cry of joy from the sick man's tent interrupted the moment. The fever had broken, Little Wolf was safe. The knowledge of the ancients had proved its worth, and with it, Hannah had also found her place not as a stranger, but as a bridge between two worlds, alongside the man who had captured her heart in the wilds of New Mexico. Winter came to Navajo territory, bringing with it icy winds from the mountains, but not the hunger they so feared. In the months following the discovery of the lost city, Hannah and Swift Raven had worked tirelessly to implement the knowledge of the ancients. The valley, once threatened by drought, now boasted small but thriving fields of crops, irrigated by a system of underground canals that few believed possible to build. "It's as if the earth itself is awakening," commented Wise Bear, observing the green shoots emerging from the previously barren soil. The old chief had become one of the most fervent defenders of the union between ancient knowledge and Navajo traditions. Hannah, now accepted as an honorary member of the tribe, spent her mornings teaching the children to read and write, while learning the Navajo language and their customs. The afternoons were dedicated to working with the medicine men, combining the medicinal wisdom of the ancients with the traditional practices of the tribe. "You have found your place among us," Swift Crow said one afternoon, finding her near the stream where she was cataloging medicinal plants. "As if you were always meant to be here." Hannah smiled, feeling the familiar warmth his words always provoked. "Sometimes I think my father knew that all the knowledge he gathered wasn't just about treasures or lost cities, but about bringing people and wisdom together." Sidi, the crystal now kept on a special altar in the council tent, continued to pulse its soft light stronger during healing ceremonies or when important decisions needed to be made. It became a symbol of the harmony between old and new, between tradition and change. But not everything was peaceful in the territory. Rumors about the lost city and its treasures continued to attract adventurers and fortune hunters. The tribe had strengthened its defenses with warriors constantly, patrolling the borders. The fate of Buck Martinez and his men served as a grim warning to those who dared to desecrate sacred lands. "Others will come," Corvo Veloz warned during a council meeting. "The desire for gold blinds men to deeper truths. Then we will show them that there are treasures greater than gold." Hannah replied, her voice carrying the confidence that had grown with each day spent among the Navajo. "As your people have shown me." The approach of winter brought with it an important decision. Following the instructions found in the Temple of the Ancients, the tribe was preparing for a ritual that hadn't been performed for generations, the ceremony of uniting two worlds. The night before the ritual, Hannah found Swift Raven in her favorite spot, a rocky outcrop that offered a privileged view of the valley and the stars above. "The elders say that tomorrow it will not only be our union that will be celebrated," he said softly, "but the union of two paths that the spirits have always known would one day meet." Hannah felt silent tears run down her face. "When I met you that day among the red rocks, I was so lost. I didn't know I was finding my way back home." Dawn brought with it the day of the ritual. The whole valley seemed to vibrate with an ancient and powerful energy. Members of neighboring tribes had arrived to witness the ceremony, bringing gifts. And stories of how the changes in Navajo territory were already beginning to influence their own lands. Hannah wore a traditional Navajo dress decorated with symbols that combined ancient elements with tribal patterns. Swift Crow, majestic in his ceremonial robes, carried body paintings that replicated the markings they had used in the lost temple. Wise Bear led the ceremony, his strong voice carrying ancient words across the valley. The crystal, brought especially for the occasion, pulsed in sync with the drums and chants that echoed through the mountains. "Just as the ancients entrusted their knowledge to you," the chief proclaimed in English and Navajo, "the spirits entrusted the future of our people to the union of their paths." When Hannah and Swift Crow exchanged their vows first in the Navajo language and then in English, the crystal glowed with an intensity that dazzled even the midday sun. It was as if the guardians of the lost city themselves were blessing the union. "This is just the beginning," Swift Crow whispered to his now wife as the celebration continued around them. There is much more knowledge to be discovered, many more bridges to be built. Hannah nodded, her heart overflowing with joy and purpose. And we will face every challenge together, as it was always meant to be. As the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky with colors reminiscent of the day they met, Hannah realized that their story was bigger than a simple quest for treasure or survival. It was a story about how love could transcend cultural barriers, about how ancient wisdom could illuminate new paths, and about how sometimes you had to lose yourself completely to find your true destiny. The Navajo territory had been transformed, not just physically with its new fields and irrigation systems, but spiritually. The union between Hannah and Swift Raven symbolized a new era, where ancient knowledge and Navajo wisdom intertwined to create a brighter future. And in the nights that followed, as the stars shone over the renewed valley, Hannah and Swift Raven continued their work as guardians, not just of ancient knowledge, but of a worldview where different cultures could come together and flourish like the plants that now grew in the once barren desert. The crystal continued to pulsate gently on the tribe's altar, a constant reminder that some treasures could not be measured in gold, and that the greatest adventures were not those that led to material riches, but those that led the heart to its true home.